I took the position at Kessler-Vos Sleep Research Institute in the fall of 2019. Not because I was passionate about somnology, I wasn't, but because I just finished my doctorate in cognitive neuroscience, and the academic job market was, as anyone in the field will tell you, essentially a closed door. Kessler-Vos offered a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship with a modest stipend, housing assistance, and access to their polysomnography lab, which at the time was considered one of the better-equipped facilities on the East Coast. The institute itself was tucked into a converted medical building on the outskirts of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, an old 3-story brick structure that had once been a rehabilitation center for spinal cord injuries. They gutted most of it in 2014 and rebuilt the interior to accommodate 12 individual sleep chambers, a central monitoring suite, and a small wing of offices and conference rooms. It still smelled faintly of that particular industrial cleaner they use in medical facilities. That flat chemical smell that's not quite lemon but wants you to think it is. My role was primarily data analysis. I processed EEG readings, cataloged sleep architecture patterns, and helped compile the quantitative sections of papers that the senior researchers would eventually publish. It was tedious, exacting work. Most days I arrived at 7 in the morning, sat in front of 3 monitors displaying waveform data, and left around 6 in the evening. The overnight shifts when the actual studies took place were handled by a rotating team of sleep technicians. I wasn't part of that rotation initially. That changed in January of 2020. One of the overnight techs, a woman named Deborah Kwan, had a family emergency. Her mother had a stroke, if I remember correctly, and she needed to take extended leave. Dr. Asher, who ran the lab, asked if any of the postdocs would be willing to fill in on overnight monitoring shifts until they could hire a replacement. The pay bump was negligible, maybe an extra $400 a month, but I said yes because I thought it would give me better insight into the raw data I was already spending my days analyzing. Understanding the context of acquisition is important when you're working with physiological signals. At least, that's what I told myself. The truth is probably simpler. I was bored, I was lonely in a city where I knew no one, and the idea of being awake in a quiet building while other people slept held a strange appeal to me at the time. The monitoring suite was a room roughly the size of a large living room, centered around a curved desk with 6 workstations. Each workstation displayed feeds from 2 sleep chambers video: EEG, EAG, 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 respiratory effort, pulse oximetry. The video feeds were infrared, so everything appeared in that washed-out green-gray tone. The subjects looked like ghosts of themselves. The room was kept dim, with only the glow of the screens and a small desk lamp if you needed to write something by hand. There was a coffee machine in the corner that produced something barely qualifying as coffee, and a mini fridge stocked with water bottles and occasionally someone's leftover lunch that they'd forget about until it began to smell. The study I was monitoring during those first few weeks was unremarkable. It was a longitudinal sleep architecture, study 12 subjects, all healthy adults between 25 and 40, sleeping in the lab 3 nights per week over a period of 8 weeks. The goal was to map the consistency of their sleep stage transitions across repeated nights in the same controlled environment. It was foundational work, the kind of thing that generates data for other more interesting studies. The subjects were paid volunteers, mostly graduate students and shift workers who didn't mind the odd schedule. They'd arrive around 9 in the evening, get hooked up to the polysomnography equipment by the techs, and lights out was at 10:30. My job was to watch the feeds, flag any technical issues, a loose electrode, a disconnected leaden note, anything unusual in the overnight log. For the first 3 weeks, nothing was unusual. People slept. Their brainwaves cycled through the predictable stages. They twitched during REM. Some snored. One subject 7, a man in his early 30s named Marcus, talked in his sleep occasionally, which is common and unremarkable. He'd mumble fragments of sentences, mostly unintelligible. Once I caught something that sounded like, "Put it back on the shelf," which made me smile in the dark of the monitoring suite. Sleep talking is banal. It's your brain running partial motor programs while the body is supposed to be paralyzed. Sometimes the signals leak through. I need to explain something about how sleep studies work, because it matters for what came later. When we talk about sleep cycles, we're referring to the repeated progression through sleep stages that occurs throughout the night. A typical adult goes through 4 to 6 complete cycles per night, each lasting roughly 90 minutes. Within each cycle, you move from light sleep stages 1 and 2 through deep, slow-wave sleep stage 3, and then into REM sleep, which is when most dreaming occurs. The first REM period of the night is usually short, maybe 10 minutes. They get progressively longer as the night goes on. By the 4th cycle, you might have a REM period lasting 30 to 40 minutes. We numbered the cycles for documentation purposes. REM cycle 1, REM cycle 2, and so on. It was standard notation in our logs. When something happened during a particular REM period, we'd note which cycle it occurred in. It was a Thursday night, February 6th, 2020, according to the log when I first noticed something that I couldn't immediately explain. I was watching the feeds around 3:40 in the morning. At that hour, most subjects were deep into their 3rd or 4th sleep cycle. The building was silent except for the hum of the HVAC system and the soft electronic drone of the monitoring equipment. I had a cup of terrible coffee going cold beside my keyboard. I was watching the EEG feeds more than the video because at that point I was still primarily a data person, and the waveforms were what I understood. Subject 4A woman named Priya, 28 years old, a pharmacy technician, entered REM. I could see it in the EEG. The low-voltage mixed-frequency activity. The rapid eye movements showing up on the EOG channels. Normal. Then, about 6 minutes into the REM period, something happened on the audio channel. Each chamber had a small microphone, primarily to detect snoring or apnea events, but it also picked up vocalizations. Priya said something. It was quiet but clear enough to register on the audio waveform. I turned up the gain on her channel and listened. It sounded like she said, "It's the same room." Sleep talking. I noted it in the log subject 4 vocalization during REM 403. 47 content. Possible phrase, "It's the same room," and moved on. About 2 minutes later, subject 9A man named Colin, 34, worked at a warehouse also in REM, also cycle 4 vocalized. I caught it on the waveform and turned up his gain. He said something that sounded like, "the same room," or possibly "it's the same room." The audio quality wasn't perfect through those microphones. They were omnidirectional condensers mounted in the ceiling, and you got some HVAC noise bleeding in. I noted it. 2 subjects, similar vocalizations, same approximate time. Coincidence was the obvious explanation. Sleep talking often produces generic, fragmentary language. The same room is hardly a specific or unusual phrase. Both subjects were sleeping in the same type of room-small, identical chambers with the same layout, the same bed, the same dim nightlight near the floor. If their sleeping brains were processing their immediate environment at some level which research suggests they do, then it would make sense that similar environmental inputs might produce similar linguistic outputs. I didn't think much more about it that night. The next monitoring shift I pulled was the following Tuesday. Same study, same subjects, same routine. I settled into the monitoring suite around 10:15, watched the techs finish hooking everyone up on the video feeds, and prepared for another long, quiet night. At 3:22 a.m., Subject 4 entered her 4th REM cycle. At 3:2009, Subject 9 entered his. Subjects 2, 6, and 11 were also in REM at approximately the same time, which is normal by the 4th cycle of the night. Most sleepers have roughly synchronized their timing simply because they all went to sleep at the same time and cycles are of approximately uniform duration. At 3:34, I caught a vocalization from subject 11. A man named Y29, a graduate student in urban planning. He whispered something. I turned up the gain. It sounded like, "We're in the same room." 30 seconds later, subject 4, Priya. The same room. I was almost certain this time. I started checking the other audio channels, turning up the gain one by one. Subject 6A, woman named Janelle, was producing faint vocalizations, but I couldn't resolve them into words. It might have been same, or it might have been a sigh. Subject 9, Colin, was silent. Subject 2 produced what sounded like a single-syllable room, or whom, or just a vowel sound. I sat there in the dim blue light of the screens and felt a small, cold sensation in my chest. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling of noticing a pattern in data that you weren't looking for. That particular cognitive sharpening when your brain says, "Wait, that's not random." But I was tired. It was 3:30 in the morning. I'd been staring at screens for 5 hours. And the rational explanations were all still available to me. Same environment, same nightly routine, same types of brains responding to the same types of stimuli. Priming effects. If these subjects interacted in the hallway before lights out, which they sometimes did, briefly they might have discussed the rooms. A shared phrase about the sameness of the chambers could have lodged in multiple subjects' short-term memory and surfaced during dreaming. It was unusual, but not impossible, and not necessarily meaningful. I wrote it up in the overnight log. Multiple subjects vocalized similar content during REM Cycle 4, approx. 03, 3003, 40. Possible shared phrase regarding room/environment. Recommend review of pre-sleep interactions and chamber conditions. I flagged it for Dr. Asher, but didn't mark it as urgent. It wasn't urgent. It was a curiosity. Dr. Asher didn't mention it to me the next day. I assumed he'd read the log and filed it as unremarkable. The following Thursday, February 13th, I was back on overnight monitoring. I remember the date because it was the day before Valentine's Day, and one of the techs, a young guy named Jordan, had made a joke about spending his romantic evening watching strangers sleep. He said it with the kind of forced humor that told me he was also alone that week. I'll be honest, I was watching for it this time. I was paying attention to the 4th REM cycle specifically. I had the audio gains turned up slightly on all 12 channels from the start of the night. I told myself I was being thorough, scientifically curious. That's what I was doing. The 4th cycles began rolling in around 3.15. By 3.35, 8 of the 12 subjects were in REM. I was watching the audio waveforms like a hawk. For several minutes, nothing. Just the flat hiss of ambient noise, the occasional rustle of a subject shifting under their blanket. Then, at 3:41 a.m., subject 7 Marcus, the one who occasionally talked in his sleep, produced a clear vocalization. I didn't even need to turn up the gain, he said, distinctly. "We're all in the same room." 4 seconds later, I checked the timestamp. It was exactly 4 seconds subject 4 said. "We're all in the same room." Then subject 11. "We're all in the same room." Then subject 2. Then subject 6. 5 subjects speaking within a span of roughly 20 seconds. The same sentence. I could hear it clearly on each channel. The voices were different pitches, different timbres. Marcus's deeper register, Priya's lighter voice, but the words were identical. And the cadence was nearly identical too. The same flat, quiet delivery. Not whispered exactly, but spoken without emphasis, like reading a sentence off a page. Subject 9 produced a vocalization 3 seconds after subject 6, but his was less clear. It might have been the same sentence, or it might have been something else. Subjects 1, 3, 5, 8, 10, and 12 were either not in REM at that moment, or were in REM but silent. My hands were cold. I noticed that because I was trying to type the log entry and my fingers felt stiff on the keys. The monitoring suite suddenly felt very large and very empty around me. I typed everything exactly as I observed it. Times, subjects, phrases. I flagged it as notable event synchronized vocalization. I debated for a long moment whether to wake someone up, call Dr. Asher at home, or page Jordan, who was sleeping in the break room in case of equipment issues. I decided not to. The event had passed. The subjects were still asleep, their vitals normal, their EEGs showing ordinary REM patterns. Whatever it was over. I spent the remaining hours of that shift replaying the audio. I isolated each channel and listened to them individually, then together. The sentences were not perfectly simultaneous. There was that sequential quality, each one following the last by a few seconds, like a wave moving through the building. But the content was, as far as I could determine, identical. 6 words. We're all in the same room. The next morning, I caught Dr. Asher before his first meeting. I told him what had happened. He was a tall, thin man in his late 50s, with a habit of cleaning his glasses while he listened to you, which he did now. When I finished, he put his glasses back on and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Similar vocalizations during REM aren't unheard of, he said. There are documented cases of simultaneous sleep talking between co-sleeping partners. These subjects aren't co-sleeping, I said. They're in separate soundproofed chambers. Soundproofs, but not anechoic, he said. There could be structural vibration transfer, low-frequency sounds moving through the walls or floor. They all said the same sentence, Dr. Asher, at nearly the same time. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Write it up formally. I'll review the audio and the EEG data. Let's see if it repeats next week. If it does, we'll adjust the protocol." He said it the way you'd say, "Let's keep an eye on it. Professionally interested, but not alarmed." I left his office feeling like I'd overreacted. Maybe I had. Maybe the late hour and the quiet building and the green glow of the infrared feeds had made something seem more disturbing than it actually was. I went home that morning and slept for 6 hours, and when I woke up in my dim apartment in the early afternoon, I lay in bed for a while thinking about what it would mean for 5 separate people to produce the same sentence during the same phase of sleep. Not what it would mean in a horror story. I wasn't thinking about it that way yet. But what it would mean neurologically. What mechanism could account for it? The brain is an electrochemical system. Language production during sleep is already an anomaly, a glitch in the motor inhibition that REM atonia is supposed to provide. For multiple brains to produce the same linguistic output simultaneously, without shared sensory input, without communication, what would that require? I kept coming back to the same problem. There was no plausible mechanism. You could invoke coincidence for 2 subjects, maybe even 3, but 5 with the same sentence, in the same 20-second window? The probability was vanishingly small. Unless there was a shared stimulus I wasn't detecting. A sound. An electromagnetic signal. Something in the environment that all 12 chambers were exposed to simultaneously. I went back to the building that evening. It was my day off, technically. But I wanted to check something. I went into each of the sleep chambers and listened. I stood in the dark and I listened. The HVAC produced a low, even hum. The fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed faintly when they were on, but they were off during study hours. I could hear nothing else. No vibration. No rhythmic sound. Nothing that resembled language or could be mistaken for it. I checked the soundproofing specifications. The chambers were rated to reduce sound transmission by 45 decibels. A normal speaking voice is about 60 decibels. Even if one subject spoke clearly, the sound reaching an adjacent chamber would be around 15 decibels well below the threshold of conscious perception, and far below what would be needed to prime a specific sentence. I reported my informal investigation to Dr. Asher via email. He replied with a single line, "Good diligence. Let's wait for the next session." The next Thursday session was February 20th. I arrived early. I calibrated all 12 audio channels carefully. I tested each microphone by snapping my fingers in each chamber and confirming clear pickup. I checked the gain levels. I checked the clock synchronization between workstations. I was methodical. If the event repeated, I wanted perfect documentation. That night, 9 of the 12 subjects entered their 4th REM cycle between 3:10 and 3:45 a.m. I watched. I waited. At 3:38, subject 11 vocalized. Then subject 4. Then subject 7. Then subject 2. Then subject 9. Then subject 6. Then subject 1 who had never vocalized before in any of my overnight shifts. 7 subjects. Sequential, each a few seconds after the last. I listened to each channel in turn, my heart beating in a way that I was clinically aware was too fast for someone sitting still in a chair. They were all saying the same thing, but it wasn't the same sentence as before. This time it was. "We can see the ceiling. 7 subjects." Same sentence, same flat effect, same unhurried delivery. Occurring within a span of roughly 30 seconds during the 4th REM cycle of the night. I paged Jordan immediately. He came stumbling into the monitoring suite in his socks, rubbing his face. "What's wrong?" he said. "Equipment failure?" "Listen," I said, and I played back the audio from Subject 7 channel. He leaned in close to the speaker. His face was puffy from sleep, and his eyes were squinting in the light of the screens. He listened. Then he frowned. "That's Marcus," he said, talking in his sleep. "Now listen to this one." I played Subject 4 channel. He listened. "Okay, same kind of thing. Same words," I said. "Jordan, it's the same words." 7 of them said the same sentence within 30 seconds. He looked at me for a long moment. I could see him processing it, weighing whether to take me seriously or whether to attribute this to sleep-deprived pattern-seeking. "Play them together," he said. I pulled up the 7 audio tracks simultaneously and played them. In the monitoring suite, the speakers produced a layered chorus of quiet voices, 7 people saying, "We can see the ceiling," offset by a few seconds each, overlapping like a round sung in a cathedral. Jordan didn't say anything for a while. He just stood there with his arms crossed, looking at the screens. Finally, he said, "That's weird. It happened last week too," I said. "Different sentence." "What sentence?" "We're all in the same room." He uncrossed his arms and put his hands in his pockets. "Did you tell Asher?" "Yes." "What'd he say?" "He said to document it." Jordan nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He stood there for another minute, looking at the video feeds. All 7 subjects were still asleep. Their bodies were still. Their faces were slack. Their eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids. "They're still in REM?" "Yes." "All of them?" I checked. 6 are still in REM. Subject 1 has transitioned to stage 2. "Huh," Jordan said. He stood there for a while longer, then said, "I'm going to make coffee. You want coffee?" I said yes. He left. He came back with 2 cups, and we sat in the monitoring suite together until dawn, but nothing else happened. The subjects slept normally through the rest of the night. They woke up at their scheduled time, 6:30 a.m., and when the morning techs asked them how they'd slept, every one of them said fine. Normal. Nothing unusual. I started pulling data the next day. I went back through every overnight log since the study began in early January, and looked for vocalization events during REM Cycle 4 specifically. There were scattered instances in the first 2 weeks Marcus talking in his sleep, another subject producing unintelligible sounds but nothing synchronized. The first instance of multiple subjects vocalizing in the same time window was February 6th, my first documented observation. But here's what bothered me. Deborah Kwan had been monitoring before me. She'd been on the overnight shifts from the study's start in January until her departure in late January. I pulled up her logs. They were thorough. Deborah was meticulous, but there was no mention of synchronized vocalizations. No mention of similar phrases. No flagged audio events during REM Cycle 4, which meant either it hadn't been happening before I started monitoring, or she hadn't noticed it, or her logs were incomplete. I called Deborah. She was still on leave in California, taking care of her mother. I felt bad bothering her, but I asked if she remembered anything unusual from the overnight shifts in January. She thought about it and said no. Pretty quiet study, she said. Boring, honestly. Why? I told her about the synchronized vocalizations. There was a pause. Then she said, "That's strange." "No, I never heard of anything like that." "Are you sure it's not crosstalk on the audio channels?" I was sure. I'd checked. Each channel was isolated. The microphones were hardwired to separate inputs. There was no electronic path by which one channel's audio could bleed into another. I thanked her and hung up. The implication was that whatever was happening had started sometime between late January when Deborah left in early February, when I first noticed it. Or it had started earlier and she genuinely hadn't caught it. But Deborah was good. She would have caught it. I didn't want to think about what it meant if the event had somehow begun in my presence, so I didn't think about it. The study was scheduled to run for 8 weeks total, ending in early March. I monitored every Thursday and Tuesday overnight shift for the remaining sessions. Let me describe what happened during each. February 25th, Tuesday. 4th REM cycle, 3:29 a.m. 8 subjects vocalized sequentially. The sentence was, "The lights are above us." Duration of the event, approximately 40 seconds. All subjects remained asleep. EEG showed uninterrupted REM activity throughout the vocalizations. February 27th, Thursday. 4th REM cycle, 3:44 a.m. 9 subjects vocalized. The sentence was, "We can hear something in the walls." Duration, approximately 50 seconds. Again, all subjects remained asleep. One subject 3, who had never vocalized before, produced the sentence clearly and then immediately transitioned to stage 2 sleep, as though the act of speaking had partially roused her. March 3rd, Tuesday. 4th REM cycle, 3:36 a.m. 10 subjects. The sentence was, "It's getting closer to the glass." This was the first time more than 9 subjects participated. Only subjects 5 and 8 were silent. Subject 5 was not in REM at the time, and subject 8 audio showed faint murmuring, but nothing I could confidently transcribe. I need to stop here and describe something about the way these sentences felt when I heard them. I've presented them clinically, timestamps, subject numbers, transcriptions, but sitting alone in that dim room at 3:30 in the morning, listening to 10 sleeping people speak the same words in their quiet, flat, emptied-out voices without inflection, without emotion, without anything that sounded like consciousness, it was deeply, physically uncomfortable. I don't mean frightening in the way a horror movie is frightening. I mean it made my body feel wrong. My skin would tighten. My stomach would drop. There was something about the unanimity of it, the sense that these 12 separate minds had temporarily become one mind, or were reflecting one mind, or were being spoken through. I couldn't shake the feeling that the sentences were addressed to someone, that there was a we, and that the we was looking at something. that the subjects were not producing random language, but describing a shared perceptual experience. But that's not possible. You don't share dreams. Consciousness is private. The contents of one person's REM sleep are inaccessible to another person's brain. There is no known mechanism by which sleeping subjects can communicate telepathically. I knew this. I know this. And yet the sentences were consistent with a shared observation. We're all in the same room. We can see the ceiling. The lights are above us. We can hear something in the walls. It's getting closer to the glass. If you read those in sequence, they tell a story. They describe an experience. A group of people in a room, looking up at a ceiling with lights, hearing something in the walls, watching something approach the glass. What glass? There was no glass in the sleep chambers. The observation window in the monitoring suite had glass, but the subjects couldn't see it from their chambers. And besides, they were asleep. They were all asleep. Dr. Asher reviewed the accumulated data at the end of February. He called me into his office on a Friday morning. His glasses were already off, being cleaned when I sat down. "I've listened to the audio," he said. "All sessions. And? It's unusual," he said. "I've reached out to a colleague at Johns Hopkins who works on parasomnia. She's interested. What does she think it is? She doesn't know. No one's documented anything quite like this. Synchronized sleep talking in non-co-sleeping subjects." He put his glasses back on. "There are a few possibilities. Environmental stimulus below our detection threshold. Shared pre-sleep priming that we haven't identified, or..." He paused. "There's some literature on group-level neural entrainment, brainwave synchronization between individuals in close physical proximity. It's speculative, but it's not completely without basis. Neural entrainment doesn't produce identical language," I said. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." He looked at me. "How are you holding up, the overnight shifts?" "Fine," I said. "You look tired. I'm working overnights." Of course I look tired. He nodded. "The study ends next week. March 5th is the last overnight session. After that, we'll have the full data set and we can analyze it properly. In the meantime, I don't want you to worry about what it means. That's not your job. Your job is to observe and document." I said okay. I left his office. I wanted to ask him something else. I wanted to ask him if he'd listened to the audio himself, alone, in a quiet room, and if it had made his skin feel the way mine felt. But that wasn't a scientific question, so I didn't ask it. There's something I haven't mentioned yet because I wasn't sure it was relevant, and I'm still not sure. But I'll include it because it happened, and I promised myself when I started writing this that I would include everything, even the parts I can't explain or connect. Around late February, I can't pin down the exact date I started having trouble sleeping during the day. This isn't unusual for someone working overnight shifts. Your circadian rhythm fights you, but my difficulty was specific. I would fall asleep normally, sleep for 2 or 3 hours, and then wake up suddenly with the absolute conviction that I had just been speaking. Not that I'd been dreaming about speaking. That my mouth had been moving, that my vocal cords had been engaged, that words had physically left my body while I was unconscious. I never caught myself doing it. I lived alone. There was no one to tell me whether I talked in my sleep, but the feeling was so strong, that dry, slightly strained sensation in the throat, like after you've been lecturing for an hour, that I believed it. I couldn't remember what I'd been saying. Just the physical after effect of having said something. I thought about setting up a recording device, my phone or a cheap microphone, but something stopped me. I told myself it was because I was too tired to bother. The truth is, I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to know what I was saying alone in my apartment at 2 p.m. with the curtains drawn. March 3, RD's session, the one with the sentence about the glass was the second to last overnight. The final session was March 5th, a Thursday. I prepared for it the way I'd prepared for the others. Carefully, methodically, with a sense of dread that I could not fully justify to myself. It was just sleep talking. It was just a strange phenomenon. It would end when the study ended. The subjects would go home and sleep in their own beds and never speak in unison again. I would go back to daytime data analysis and my circadian rhythm would normalize and the tight feeling in my chest would go away. On March 5th, all 12 subjects arrived on schedule. The techs hooked them up. Lights out at 10:30. I watched the screens. Hours passed. The building hummed. The coffee machine gurgled. I ate a granola bar at midnight and another at 2 a.m. The subjects moved through their sleep cycles in the regular, predictable way that human bodies do. At 3:33 a.m., the fourth REM cycles began. I sat forward. I had all 12 audio channels up, gain slightly elevated, waveforms scrolling. The video feeds showed 12 still bodies in 12 dim rooms, closed eyes, slack mouths, rapid eye movements visible as fluttering beneath the lids on the infrared cameras. At 3:41 a.m., Subject 7 vocalized, then Subject 4, then Subject 11, then Subject 2, then Subject 9, then Subject 6, then Subject 1, then Subject 3, then Subject 10, then Subject 12, then Subject 8, then Subject 5. All 12. For the first time, all 12 subjects vocalized. The wave moved through them in approximately 60 seconds. Each one spoke in that same flat, quiet, uninflected voice. Each one said the same sentence. The sentence was, "We can see someone watching us through the glass." I sat in the monitoring suite. In front of me was the curved desk with its 6 workstations. Behind me was the observation window that looked into the hallway. The hallway was dark. The observation window was glass. I did not turn around. I sat very still and I watched the screens and I listened to the audio and I did not turn around. My body felt like it was made of something rigid and cold. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the HVAC ha. I could hear, very faintly, the last echoes of the last subject's voice fading on the audio channel. I don't know how long I sat there. It might have been 30 seconds. It might have been 5 minutes. At some point, my hand moved to the keyboard and I typed the log entry. My fingers were shaking slightly. I misspelled vocalization and had to backspace and retype it. When I finally did turn around, and I did turn around, eventually because the rational part of my mind insisted that there was nothing there, that the subjects were describing their shared dream experience and not my physical reality, that the glass they referred to was metaphorical or imaginary or pertaining to their own chambers. The hallway behind me was dark and empty. There was no one there. Of course there was no one there. It was 3:45 in the morning and the building was empty except for me and 12 sleeping people and Jordan dozing in the break room 2 floors up. I finished the shift. The subjects woke at 6:30. They reported sleeping well. They had no memory of speaking. They had no memory of any shared dream. They had no memory of a room, a ceiling, lights, walls, glass, or anything approaching them. When the morning tech-A woman named Sandra did the standard exit interviews, every subject reported either no dream recall or vague, mundane fragments. Something about a grocery store. I think I was at work. Can't remember. The study ended. The subjects were paid their final stipends and sent home. The data was compiled. I went back to daytime hours. Dr. Asher and I had a meeting about the synchronized vocalization data in mid-March. He'd brought in the Johns Hopkins colleague doctor, Laura Fen via videocall. She'd reviewed the audio and the EEG recordings. She was interested but cautious. "It's anomalous," she said. I won't pretend otherwise. But there are avenues of inquiry before we jump to anything exotic. Environmental factors you may not have identified. Infrasound. Electromagnetic fields from the equipment creating shared neural stimulation. Even something as simple as a CO2 buildup in the ventilation system during those hours causing similar alterations in brain chemistry across subjects. I mentioned that the sentences had content that seemed sequential, that they appeared to describe a shared experience. Pareidolia, she said. We're pattern-seeking animals. If I give you 6 random sentences, you'll arrange them into a narrative. That's what brains do. I wanted to argue. I didn't. Dr. Asher said they would submit a brief report to a parasomnia journal and recommend further investigation. He thanked me for my diligence. He said I'd done good work. I went back to my office and my 3 monitors and my waveform data, and I tried to forget about it. I couldn't. It wasn't the sentences themselves. It wasn't even the impossibility of the synchronization. It was the last sentence, the one about the glass and my own reaction to it. The fact that I had not turned around. That my body had known, with a certainty that preceded thought, that I should not turn around. And I couldn't figure out why. If there was nothing there, and there was nothing there then, why had every part of me resisted looking? What had I been afraid of seeing? I started reviewing the video feeds from that final night. Not the sleep chamber feeds, those showed nothing except sleeping subjects. I reviewed the hallway camera. The building had standard security cameras in the corridors, recording continuously. I pulled the footage from the hallway outside the monitoring suite, the hallway visible through the observation window behind my desk. The footage from March 5th, 3:41 a.m., the time of the final vocalization event, showed an empty hallway. Dark. Still. No one there. I watched a 30-minute window on either side of the event. Nothing. Then I went back further. I pulled the hallway footage from every previous event night. February 6, 3:47 a.m. Empty hallway. February 13, 3:41 a.m. Empty hallway. February 20th, 3:38 a.m. Empty hallway. February 25th, 3:29 a.m. I stopped the playback. At 3:29 a.m. on February 25th, the hallway outside the monitoring suite was not empty. I could see a figure, standing in the corridor, approximately 10 feet from the observation window. The footage was low-resolution security camera material grayscale, slightly grainy, wide-angle. But the figure was clearly there. A person, standing in the hallway, facing the window of the monitoring suite. Facing, I realized, the exact direction they would need to face in order to see me sitting at my desk. The figure stood there for approximately 4 minutes, from 3:28 to 3:32. Then it moved. It walked slowly, unhurriedly down the corridor in the direction of the sleep chamber wing. And then it was out of frame. I couldn't identify the figure. The resolution was too low. The corridor was too dark. I could determine that it was a person bipedal, approximately average height, wearing what appeared to be dark clothing. But I couldn't see a face, couldn't determine gender, couldn't identify any distinguishing features. I checked the building access logs. The electronic locks recorded every badge swipe. On February 25th, between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., the only badge swipes were mine at 10:07 p.m., Jordan's at 9:45 p.m., and the 12 subjects' arrivals between 8:30 and 9:15 p.m. No one else entered the building. No one swiped out until 6:15 a.m. I pulled the other corridor cameras. The building had 6 total lobby, 2 hallway cameras on the first floor, 1 on the second floor, 1 in the stairwell, and 1 at the rear exit. I tracked the figure from the monitoring suite hallway camera. After it walked out of frame toward the sleep chamber wing, it should have appeared on the second hallway camera, which covered that portion of the first floor. I queued up the second hallway camera at 3:32 a.m. Nothing. The second hallway was empty. The figure did not appear on any other camera. I reviewed the footage again and again. On the monitoring suite hallway camera, the figure was clearly present from 3:28 to 3:32. On all other cameras, there was no trace of it, as though it existed only in that one stretch of corridor during those 4 minutes and then was simply gone. I wanted to tell someone. I nearly called Dr. Asher, but I imagined the conversation explaining that I'd found a figure on security footage that didn't appear on any other camera during the exact time window of the vocalization event. I imagined him cleaning his glasses and suggesting a lens artifact, a shadow, a glitch in the recording system. And maybe he would have been right. Security cameras produce artifacts. Infrared illumination creates strange shadows. Lens flare can look like a shape. I wasn't a video analyst. I didn't have the expertise to say definitively that what I was seeing was a person. But it looked like a person, standing there, looking at me through the glass. I didn't tell Dr. Asher. I didn't tell anyone. I saved a copy of the footage to my personal drive and I closed the file. Over the following weeks, life returned to normal, or what passes for normal in a research environment. I analyzed data, I wrote methods sections, I attended lab meetings. The synchronized vocalization data was compiled into a preliminary report. Dr. Asher and Dr. Fenn exchanged emails about potential follow-up studies. There was talk of applying for a grant to run a larger, more controlled version of the experiment. None of it happened, of course, because 2 weeks later the pandemic shut everything down and the Institute went to remote work for the next year and a half. I left Kessler Voss in August of 2020. My fellowship was technically through 2021, but with the lab closed and no prospect of in-person research, I took a position at a different institution, a computational neuroscience lab in Massachusetts where I could work remotely. I was glad to leave Harrisburg. I was glad to leave the building with its chemical lemon smell and its dim hallways and its 12 identical chambers. But here's what I haven't been able to leave. The sleep talking. My own sleep talking. It didn't stop when the study ended. I started recording myself in May of 2020. I set my phone on the nightstand and ran a voice-activated recording app all night. Every night. Most nights, there was nothing. I slept silently. But once every week or two, the app would capture something. The first time I listened back, I expected gibberish, random fragments, normal sleep-talking content. What I heard was my own voice quieter than my waking voice, flatter, without inflection saying a single sentence, clear and distinct. We're still in the same room. I deleted the recording. I told myself I'd heard it wrong, that I was priming myself to hear those words because they were stuck in my memory. I waited a week and recorded again. The next capture. The lights haven't changed. And again, a few days later. There are more of us now. I stopped listening to the recordings for a while after that. Several months. I moved to Massachusetts, started the new position, tried to put distance between myself and the whole experience. I dated someone briefly. I adopted a cat. I ate meals and went for walks and read papers and had normal conversations with normal people. In January of 2021, almost exactly a year after I'd started at Kessler Voss, I turned the recording app back on. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or the need to know if it was still happening. I captured a vocalization that first night back. My voice, flat and quiet, at 3:38 a.m. We can see someone new watching through the glass. I should explain why I'm writing this now. It's been over 5 years. I've tried therapy. I told my therapist about anxiety and sleep disruption without giving her the full context. She suggested CBT techniques for rumination. They don't work because this isn't rumination. Rumination is when your mind circles around something that worries you. This is different. This is my body doing something while I'm unconscious, and I cannot stop it because I am not present when it happens. I still record myself. Not every night, but regularly. The sentences continue. They've changed over the years. They've evolved. I won't transcribe all of them because there are dozens now, but I'll note the general trajectory. The early ones 2020, 2021 were observational. We can see the ceiling. The walls are the same. The lights are on. Later, 2022 and 2023, they became more active. We're trying to count us. Someone is speaking through one of us. The room is larger than before. And more recently this past year, they've become something else. Something that makes me feel sick when I hear my own voice saying them. We think the one who watches can hear us now. The glass is thinner. We're learning to stay awake inside. I don't know what I'm part of. I don't know who else is saying these things. I tried once to track down the subjects from the original study. I found Marcus on LinkedIn. He's a project manager now, lives in Philadelphia. I sent him a message. I asked casually if he'd experienced any unusual sleep phenomena since the study. He replied politely that he hadn't, that he barely remembered the study at all, and wished me well. I didn't push further. I found Priya too, but she didn't respond to my message. Maybe they don't remember because whatever it is has moved on from them. Maybe they were only part of it while they were in those rooms, and I was part of it too. And when they left, the connection severed. But mine didn't, because I was on the other side of the glass, because I was watching. Or maybe they're all still saying the sentences in their sleep and they just don't know. Just like I didn't know until I started recording. Last month, June 2025, I got an email from Dr. Asher. The first communication I'd had from him in over 3 years. The subject line was quick question. The body of the email said, "Hi, hope you're well. Strange thing to ask, but have you experienced any unusual sleep phenomena since leaving KV? No need to elaborate if you'd rather not. I'm compiling notes for an informal follow-up." I stared at that email for a long time. Compiling notes for an informal follow-up is not something a retired researcher does without a reason. It implies that he's noticed something, that someone else has reported something, that the phenomenon didn't end when the study ended. I haven't replied yet. I don't know what I would say. Yes, I speak in my sleep in a voice that doesn't sound like mine, using the pronoun we, and the sentences describe a room I've never seen and a group I've never met. How do you write that in a professional email? But here's what keeps me awake, actually awake. At night, staring at the ceiling of my apartment in the dark. It's not the sentences themselves. It's the trajectory of them. The early ones described passive observation. A group of people, in a room looking at things. A ceiling, walls, lights, glass. Then they became aware of being observed. We can see someone watching. Then they began to count themselves, to understand their collective nature. And now they're talking about the glass getting thinner. About staying awake inside. Inside what? Inside the sleep? Inside the room? Inside the people whose mouths they speak through? 2 nights ago I recorded myself again. The sentence was the clearest one I've ever captured. My voice was louder than usual, not quite at conversational volume, but close. And it didn't have that completely flat quality that the earlier recordings had. There was something in it. Not quite emotion, but intentionality. Direction. As though the words were aimed at someone rather than simply spoken into the air. The sentence was, "We're almost through." I don't know what that means. I don't know who's speaking. I don't know if it's me, some part of my sleeping brain producing language from a source I can't access while conscious, or if it's something using my mouth, my throat, my voice, the way it used those 12 subjects in those 12 rooms. I don't know what the glass is. I don't know what through means, but I'll tell you what I noticed 2 nights ago. After I played back that recording and sat on the edge of my bed in the early morning dark with my phone in my shaking hand, I noticed that my throat was sore the way it always is after a recording captures something. That dry, strained feeling. But this time, it was different. This time, it felt like it was still going. Like my throat was still engaged. Like the vibration hadn't fully stopped. I put my hand on my neck, and I could feel it. A faint tremor in my vocal cords. Not a sound nothing audible, but a physical vibration. A hum. As though something was still speaking through me, at a frequency just below what the human ear can detect. It lasted about 10 seconds. Then it stopped. I sat there for a long time afterward. My cat was asleep at the foot of the bed, undisturbed. The apartment was silent. The ceiling above me was white and blank and ordinary. But I couldn't stop looking at it. I kept thinking, we can see the ceiling. And for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, not even long enough to be sure it happened, I thought I could see it too. Not my ceiling. A different ceiling. Brighter. With flat panel lights. Like a medical facility. Like a lab. Like 12 identical rooms. I blinked and it was gone. My ceiling again. My apartment. My cat. The early morning light through the curtains. But the feeling didn't go away. That feeling of being watched from a very close distance by something that isn't behind you or in front of you or outside the window, but is somehow inside the angle of your own perception, occupying the space between what you see and what sees you. I still haven't replied to Dr. Asher's email. I don't know if I should. I don't know if it matters anymore whether I reply, whether I tell anyone, whether I record myself or don't. Because if the sentences are true, if there is a we and a room and a glass, and the glass is getting thinner, then whatever is happening isn't waiting for my permission. It isn't waiting for me to understand it. It doesn't need me to participate consciously. It already has what it needs from me. It's had it since February 2020. Since the first night I sat in that dim monitoring suite and listened to 5 sleeping strangers speak with one voice. I was on the other side of the glass, and I watched. And now I'm almost certain of this, though I can't prove it. Something watches back. Not from behind me. Not from outside. From behind my own eyes. From somewhere deeper than sleep. I can feel it most clearly in the moments just before I lose consciousness at night. That liminal instant where wakefulness dissolves. There's a presence there. Not frightening exactly, or not only frightening. Familiar. Patient. Growing. And the room it's in is getting bigger. And the glass is getting thinner. And I need to stop. I was about to write something I don't remember thinking. The word we was going to come out again, and I don't know if it was me reaching for it or something reaching through me to type it. I'll end here. Draw your own conclusions. I don't have an explanation. I don't have a resolution. I have 12 audio files from a sleep study in 2020, a folder of recordings of my own voice saying things I don't remember, an unanswered email from a researcher who retired 3 years early, and a feeling in my throat every morning when I wake up. A feeling like I've been talking all night, like we all have,